The Persephone Foundation. Timeline Archives. This next timeline is not part of the 2016 series, but the holiday that this and many other timelines call Halloween is approaching. And since it is customary to tell stories about preternatural phenomena during this time, we have decided to release a dossier about a timeline we discovered where the preternatural is not only known to exist by the majority of its populace, but technology utilizing it is widely employed. So, without further ado, timeline Ypnos Cerberus-002, Gumbo and Gatling guns. Napoleon Bonaparte was a man of many accomplishments. He stabilized France after the Revolution, he created the French Civil Code, and he conquered almost all of Europe. However, perhaps the greatest change he effected upon the world, the one act which would etch his name in human history forever, is his visit to the pyramids. In 1798, after defeating the Ottoman Turks in Egypt, Napoleon took pause in his conquests to study the legacy of the pharaohs. Drawn by the enigmatic power of the pyramids, Napoleon entered the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid of Khufu. There, he would have an experience that would change everything. In the king's chamber, Napoleon convened with none other than the Black Pharaoh, an enigmatic being which claimed to be more ancient than the stone walls of the chamber. Sensing great potential in Napoleon, he granted l'Empereur gifts that he denied even Alexander the Great. The Black Pharaoh gave Napoleon knowledge of things man was not meant to know, mysteries that to this day remain known only to the greatest sorcerers in the multiverse. What is known, and well documented, is that Napoleon augmented his abilities and those of his mortal servants with the paranormal. Upon his return to France, Napoleon took over the government and proclaimed himself Emperor of France. After crushing the Haitian revolt, Napoleon proceeded to launch a campaign of conquest, which pitted him against every other major power in Europe. By 1812, it seems that Napoleon is the uncontested master of Europe. Austria and Prussia have been crushed. The Russians retreat from France's seemingly inexhaustible armies, and the British remain wary of a possible invasion from across the Channel. This invasion happens in October of 1812, when Napoleon's sorcerers raise from the Channel the sunken fleets of those who had attempted to invade England but failed. These rotting ships, held together with preternatural energy and crewed by the tortured souls of their former sailors, sailed alongside modern ships powered by a new technology, steam engines. These ships succeeded in forcing their way past the Royal Navy and establishing a beachhead in England. French forces, both mortal and paranormal, fought their way through British forces and marched toward London. It appeared as though Napoleon would become the unchallenged master of Europe. But unbeknownst to Napoleon, the opposing coalition had preternatural weapons of their own. Using forbidden knowledge from the ancient temples of the Indus River Valley, the British had their own spells to use, and the greatest opportunity to use them presented itself in Napoleon's siege of London. Using prisoners and slaves as a sacrifice, the British summoned a blasphemous demigod, an avatar of the blood god, which tore apart the French forces. The cloven-hoofed monstrosity carved a path of destruction all the way to the coast, where the French saw their fleets being sunk by the massive tentacles of krakens. The French were slaughtered to the last man, and the Channel ran red with blood for a week. Napoleon's luck elsewhere was just as bad. Using the power of the Loa, the Haitians revolted once again, this time successfully taking over all of Hispaniola and even spreading their revolution to neighboring Louisiana. In Russia, the Mad Monk, a disheveled Siberian holy man, led the Tsar's forces to victory by aiding them with angels. multi-winged entities seemingly made of light and flame. Sensing a chance to overthrow the French, the Prussians and the Austrians revolted against the paltry occupation forces left in their countries. By 1813, the British launched an invasion of guerrilla-racked Iberia and had soundly defeated France's co-belligerents, the Americans. Napoleon wanted to use more powerful supernatural entities against his enemies, but he noticed his body growing more monstrous by the day, and the blasphemous whispers in his mind growing louder with every sacrifice. When a great clash between French and Russian supernatural forces temporarily tore a hole in the fabric of reality somewhere in Germany, both sides saw the potential for a worldwide disaster that would enslave mankind to dark entities. At Vienna, Napoleon himself approached the leaders of the coalition for an armistice. The Congress of Vienna hammered out an agreement which divided Europe between Napoleon and his enemies, an order which has persisted throughout the 19th century and into the 20th. By 1914, the world is divided into three camps. The old coalition broke in two over disputes between the more liberal and secular British and the religious authoritarian Russians. The Sixth Coalition, the British-dominated bloc, rules the seas and, as a consequence, most of the Americas, Southern Africa, and Southeast Asia. The British Empire is, in fact, two entities. In the West, the Crown and Parliament rule, where in the East, British affairs are dominated by the East India Company, a strange amalgamation of state entity and multinational corporation. The East India Company dominates affairs in London through its economic might, and at times their will in Parliament is unchallenged, but it only has direct rule in the East. The East India Company's private military is even larger than that of the British Empire proper, and they have their own independent supernatural security force. The greatest British allies are New Spain and the Kingdom of Portugal, now relocated permanently to Brazil. Both monarchies have taken to their new homes quite well, although they have not relinquished their claims to their old homelands. The Holy League, forged by Tsar Alexander I at the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars, dominates Eastern Europe and Northern Asia. As a bloc, these authoritarian monarchies despise the supernatural as affronts to God, with the notable exception of their own holy magic. The Russian Empire is certainly the most dominant of the three main Holy League states. Their heavy use of divine arts to allow their barely industrialized economy to compete with Britain and France, and the dominance of the Tsar's court by the daughters of the Dreamer, descendants of the Mad Monk, makes their leadership of an ostensibly Christian alliance the stuff of mockery and derision outside of the Empire's borders. The Kingdom of Prussia has truly become an army with a country, being highly militarized by necessity. Almost the entirety of the Prussian economy is dedicated to keeping its military operating even during a global war. The Empire of the Danube, what's left of the Austrian Empire, desires to expand westward and gain dominance over Italy and southern Germany. To aid in its holy mission, the Danubians have turned to exploring the studies of one Dr. Victor Frankenstein, to create an army which will continue to serve the Emperor even in death. Napoleon's France is largely withdrawn within the shell of his continental system, although he still has more independent allies in the United States and the Ottoman Empire. France is still under the rule of Napoleon I, the Eternal Emperor, whose monstrous body has become a desiccated mass of flesh and bone attached to a great steam-powered life support system. The Emperor no longer rules France directly, delegating this power to men he appoints for life, but he is awoken from his state of half-death for important decisions and for appointing new leaders. To the east, the Ottoman Empire has turned more to esoteric steam and oil technologies, creating an army of machines to augment their mortal forces. The Ottomans have even built a massive thinking machine deep in the deserts of Babylon, as part of an ongoing project by elements of the Ottoman government and military to create a demigod to challenge those which threaten mankind. To the west, the United States desires to forge an empire of liberty which controls the entire North American continent. Worshipping the Founding Fathers as prophets of Columbia, the goddess of liberty, the Americans see their mission to spread their particular system of republican federalism as a holy one. While claiming to be a democracy, the United States is in fact dominated by the Order of the Founders, the leaders of America's official cult. In the meanwhile, supernatural forces have taken control of various groups throughout the world, from small bands of malcontents to entire empires. Groups such as the Cult of the Supreme Being seek to overthrow existing governments and replace them with their own, while others, such as the Cult of La Santa Muerte, are content to cause havoc wherever they can. Several organizations have arisen to challenge them: the Ministry of Magic in the United Kingdom, the East India Company's Oddities Department, the Holy League's Order of Christ, and France's Department of Supernatural Affairs. However, as these organizations are beholden to the interests of geopolitics, they just as often fight one another as they do the supernatural. In all likelihood, there is no one force that could challenge the dark entities which prey on mankind should they emerge, especially if humanity's empires are too busy fighting each other at the same time. With occult organizations increasing in power throughout the early 20th century and state sponsorship of some cults, it is possible that a war between the great powers could be set off and bring an end to mankind. Points of interest. The Loco Norte is filled with minor cults, outlaws, independence movements, and American settlers. New England has its problem with cults, witches, and fishmen, but they're not as threatening as the Americans who have sworn to retake New England for a century. The Caribbean Union, formerly the United States of Haiti and Louisiana, is definitely an occult state run by a priestly caste which consults with what they believe are Loa. Their support for occult organizations in the United States may bite them in the ass someday. The cultists here who said that the Maya gods would return in 1912 took no time at all to say that their calendar actually ended on 2012 as soon as 1159 passed. The Kingdom of New Granada was granted independence when Mexico City compromised with local nobility who wanted more autonomy. Have more problems with mundane criminal organizations than they do with cults. These portions of the Amazon rainforest have become a mass of gray, fleshy, fungal organic material. Nobody knows why, exactly, and it worries Rio. The Empire of Tawantinsuyu wants to throw off all of the white states, which includes the Republic of Argentina, which wants to merely destroy the coalition-backed governments and get back at the British for their defeat in the War of 1882. The remains of Napoleon's invasion force meshed in seamlessly with local independence movements, which quickly became very large cults that threw off British rule. Theopotent entities, what the Irish government contends are the Celtic gods of old, demand sacrifices daily, and protect the Emerald Isle from Britain's fleets with a constant impenetrable fog and monsters which prowl the Irish Channel. After a century of continued resistance, the Spanish guerrillas have only vague memories of why they fight. They primarily continue their resistance to the Bonaparte in Madrid because of the whispers of the Faun. The Confederation of the Rhine is a rather unstable military dictatorship, thanks to its bordering the despoiled lands to the east and nigh constant attacks from occult German nationalist groups. Polish nationalists, the undying, frozen remnants of Napoleon's armies, and groups that disagree with Berlin and St. Petersburg. The Bosphorus has an ancient history, one that is coming back to literally haunt Istanbul and the surrounding areas. The Black Pharaoh's domains broke off from the French Empire at the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars, and has made a name for itself as the main threat to humanity's dominance on Earth. Cyrus the Great came back from the dead to oppose British, Russian, and Ottoman attempts to carve up his country. Or at least, that's what the diplomats of Persephone say. The Sepoy Mutiny became even worse when some enterprising rebels decided to vivisect suspected loyalists and collaborators to Cali. The company automatically enslaves anyone suspected of affiliation with the various Indian cults. The realm of the Celestial Dragon has closed itself off to the outside world, save for backing cults all throughout Asia, of course. Similarly, the domain of the Yamatai attacks any ships which pass too close for the Sun Empress to allow. They also wage war against the Tsar for his arrogance in seizing Hokkaido. The Katipunan's success can be attributed both to Mexico City's distance and support by various Daiwata. For reasons kept secret by all the world's governments, the Antarctic continent has become a hotspot for supernatural activity and the domain of 4 mad gods: the Blood God, the Plague Father, the Lord of Change, and the Prince of Pleasure twist the southern wastes to suit their wants, and they plot to spread their corruption to the rest of the planet. This has been a Persephone Foundation Timeline Reading. Thank you for listening, and happy Halloween!